galvanizing our community around building a healthy, vibrant, intergenerational community and thinking about aging and from all different perspectives, all different angles. So really just kol hakavod. This is fantastic. And just a brief thought, this week we celebrate in the Parsha crossing the Red Sea. And there are many midrashim that talk about how we all did it together and how we all experienced this prophetic moment together, from the very young to the very old, men and women, all of us having this like amazing, equal, diverse, revelatory experience. And then after that, we all sing a song. We sing a song together. Az Yashir Moshe. We sing a song. We sing Miriam's song. And so much of what our tradition is about is people coming together to sing their songs, to sing the Shir Chadash, the new song. And this is just the next version of that, of our people coming together from diverse background ages to sing a song of life, songs of up and down, songs of hopes and challenges, songs of aging with wisdom. And I'm just so grateful to Rabbi Chael and to this really fantastic panel that's going to be speaking tonight, and to all the events that were happening. So thank you. And I'll also remind everyone to mute yourselves unless you're speaking. So to go ahead and give yourself a big mute. I might be able to do that, but if I can't, I encourage you to do it yourselves. And with that, I hand it back over to Rabbi Chael. Except Rabbi Chael, you should not mute yourself.
Thank you, Rav Ari. The problem with muting all. It is such a pleasure to see so many faces here tonight as we continue our thinking about aging and the process of aging this winter. This is part of a series of learning and workshops and action opportunities within the Schuylkill Valley community to connect intergenerationally, to plan for our futures, and to think about what it means to age gracefully or with pleasure, and how to prepare for that. Those moments in our lives. When people asked me who this panel was designed for, I said, for everyone who is aging, which really means everyone. And looking around the virtual room, I see so many people at different places in their life journeys, which is wonderful. I have heard the panelists' thoughts before, and I know that it will be moving. And so I just want to name that I'm sure that this might bring up some complicated emotions for some people, anxiety or fear, maybe sadness over someone that you're thinking about who is aging. And Rav Ari and I are always available for a pastoral visit at any time. And also to take this opportunity to introduce and welcome and thank Elizabeth Yuri, our wonderful liaison at JCFS, who is also an amazing resource for anyone who has questions after this evening, looking for resources or connections within the community. And then finally, a big thank you to the panelists themselves, who Elizabeth will introduce, and she's moderating the panel, but they are also amazing resources within our community. And then before I turn it over, just to note, some people might have heard me saying that I'm learning about all the people with aging experience within our broader community, and we're compiling a list of our own local talent for whom we can turn as resources. So this is definitely not the end of the conversation on aging in the community. It's just the beginning, and we look forward to hearing the panel. Thank you for joining us. And just a note of technicality, we will have a Q&A at the end. And if you have questions, please send them over to me in the chat, and I will moderate that. And I will turn it over to you, Elizabeth.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Yael and Rav Ari. Really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to have this discussion this evening. And thank you all for coming. I know there's lots of different things going on out there, and so for you to put this time aside, we really appreciate it. So this particular program came about because all of us hear stories daily about complicated scenarios regarding relationships, changing lifestyles, health, caregiving, financial responsibilities, and they all revolve around aging. Aging, besides taxes, of course, is the one thing that we all have in common. We all age, but in very different ways. Our aging process does not just affect us individually, but our loved ones as well. The professionals here today will be discussing different aging scenarios from different angles. Some of you will relate to parts of these situations and hopefully will give you a glimpse of how to go about dealing with them. The goal is for you to walk away with at least one resource or tip to use in your own lives and to realize that compassion for yourselves and your loved ones are key for enjoying these moments. So now I would like to introduce the professionals on our panel. Rabbi Michelle Stern, chaplain and manager of spiritual and religious life at CJE Senior Life, teaches, leads worship, and accompanies CJE's clients, residents, and families through the aging process. She's a board certified chaplain and received rabbinic ordination from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. Ifat Bossi is a daily money manager, CPA, and owner of Bottom Line Financial. She serves the personal financial needs of individuals, including divorce, older adults, widows and widowers, adults with disabilities, and others. Her services include assistance in bill payment, budgeting, and tax organization. Barb Saracen, certified care manager at CJE Senior Life, has been at CJE for more than 30 years. She works with older adults to assist in areas that enhance quality of life through the aging process. Tamara Kushner-Grossman, manager at Irving H. and Jane W. Goldberg Legal and Benefit Services at CJE Senior Life, is a licensed attorney and works with older adults in areas such as power of attorney designation, contracts, and wills. And our narrator will be Marla Goldberg, community outreach liaison at CJE, and the person who was very instrumental, along with Rabbanit Yael, in putting this program together. So here's the agenda for this evening. We have 3 scenarios that we will run through. Each panel member will have some time to speak. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat to Rabbanit Yael, and we will answer them at the end. Each scenario will be approximately 20 minutes. At the end of all the scenarios, we will address your questions to the appropriate speakers, and then we will wrap things up. The only housekeeping, since I don't have to tell you where the washrooms are, is to please keep yourselves muted. So I'm going to turn this over to Marla. She's going to start with the first scenario.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're so delighted to all participate together in this wonderful endeavor. So here is our first scenario. An older adult is living in her home on her own, and this year she's finding it difficult to take care of herself. She wants to stay in her own home if it's possible, and she has 2 daughters that live nearby and 1 son that lives out of town. Each daughter has a different idea of what's best for their mom, and there is no medical nor financial power of attorney designated at the moment, and all 3 children are concerned about mom's financial situation. I'm going to ask Ifat to start us off tonight.
Thank you so much, Marla, and thank you for having me here. So I'm going to discuss this scenario from the financial perspective and hopefully offer some solutions along the way. The children are all worried about their mom's financial position, and it can mean many different things. I'm going to address it from 2 different angles that spoke to me right away. And the first angle is maybe they're worried about their mom running out of money. And angle number 2, maybe they are worried about their mom. Maybe she has money, but she's forgetting to pay her bills. So how do we address each one of those scenarios? In the first scenario where they are concerned that she does not have enough money, they can implement a budget, which is a roadmap, a spending plan, and it directs a person on how much money they must have to pay certain bills like rent or mortgage or insurance. And it also directs people on how much money they have for expenses that are not required expenses, but for fun. So it gives them a plan. Another tool that they might want to consider is something called a TrueLink card. And a TrueLink card, it's a Visa card, and it's refillable, and it's programmable. So what do I mean by that? It directs, it allows people to spend money only on certain things. And it was originally, and it's refillable. So, and it was designed initially for people who had addiction problems, so they couldn't spend money on alcohol or gambling. So it's just another tool in their toolbox to help the mom not spend too much money and stay within her spending means. If the problem is that she's really a low resource and could use additional funds, there's a department at North Shore Senior Center, and I think it's called something like Senior and Family Services Department for Underprivileged People or something along those lines. I believe it's state funded. And if people qualify, then they are given resources to help them with caregiving, with rides, with meals, I believe. And it's just a really worthwhile department to look into if people are really struggling with resources. So that's the side if the mom doesn't have enough resources. What if the mom has resources, but the kids are worried about her not paying her bills? Like she's forgetting to pay her bills, she's losing her bills, she's getting slapped with interest and all sorts of penalties. In this situation, a daily money manager might be helpful. And what I want to bring your attention to is an organization called American Association of Daily Money Managers. It's the organization that governs the profession of daily money managers, of which I am a member. And it's a great organization on many levels. If somebody needs a daily money manager, they could hop on, plug in their zip code, and find a daily money manager in their area. And if somebody hires a member of ADAM to help them, they're hiring somebody that has passed a background check, and it's not just once, it's every 2 years. So it's a vetting process, and it separates members of ADAM from other people doing similar sorts of work. So what is this work that we do? It's really different for everybody, but we aim to keep our clients organized and current and safe from financial exploitation. And when people think of daily money managers, they think about bill payment and putting things on auto pay that are appropriate. We can also write checks for our client's signature. We do not take away this role from our client. We are there to partner with them. And sometimes people worry about that. That's not why we're here. We're here to help people continue to lead purposeful lives. We can help with tax document organization. We can help with insurance reimbursement. It's different for everybody, and that's the beauty of every engagement. So thank you.
I'm gonna jump in if that's okay. So what comes to mind for me is that there are a lot of different opinions about what needs to happen. And so what I'm really curious about is what this woman wants and what is important to her. When we hit transition moments, such as, reaching a transition in aging or reassessing our needs, it's a good time to think about how we define purpose and meaning. Some people call that spirituality, or even quality of life. And I would encourage people to consider how they define quality of life, and that can change over time as you age about what is most important to you. And when we are able to identify what is most important to each of us, it can then guide things like medical choices, who will be your POA. I'll cue Tamara in a second. And what are you willing to give up? Like if there's financial constraints, what are you not willing to give up? What will give your life the most meaning? And what are you willing to live with? I've heard someone say once, if I can't sew, let me go. That was a quilter who said that. And there's also the famous example from the book Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, where an individual identifies that as long as he can eat ice cream and watch football, he's okay. So he could have physical ailments or other things, but if he could do those two things, he'll be happy. So how we define those things will then guide conversations with the children about, it'll help the children get on the same page as mom. If she's able to kind of clarify for herself what's most important, and then the family can come together and think through things like power of attorney, wills, finances, living situations, whatever is needed, but with that goal of keeping her quality of life in mind. So I'm going to pass it on to Tamara since I mentioned POAs. And so that's what I want to share about this particular scenario.
Powers of attorney, power of attorney. So a lot of people think that powers of attorney are really focused on death, and they don't want to talk about powers of attorney because that means we're talking about death or dying or incapacity. And I very much disagree with that. And I think that powers of attorney keep control with the individual. And the question that the power of attorney should answer is, can I live with that? Also, sometimes we do have to talk about death. And I am here to assure you that talking about death won't make you dead, right? We can talk about this and still live meaningful lives. And actually, I'm going to piggyback on something Rabbi Stern just said, because I want to tell the full story about the chocolate ice cream and football, because the full story from that book really brings in the question of, can I live with that? And what happened in the book, which everybody should buy, Rabbi Stern, maybe you could put the title and the author in the chat. A gentleman had a tumor growing on his neck, and he was told if he did nothing, it was a guarantee that he would become a quadriplegic. If he had surgery, there was still a 20% chance that he would become a quadriplegic. He decides to go ahead with the surgery. The night before, his daughter comes to him in his hospital room and says, "Dad, what if I have to make some kind of decision during surgery? How do I know what you want?" And so he says to his daughter, "If I can watch football and eat chocolate ice cream, then my life is worth living." And so the next day he goes into surgery, and the surgeons come out halfway through and say, "There's been a problem. We did the surgery. Your father is having major bleeding. We can save his life, but it is a guarantee that he will be a quadriplegic. Do we have your permission to do the next surgery? You have 3 minutes to decide." And so she says to the surgeon, "Well, if he's a quadriplegic, can he eat chocolate ice cream and watch football?" And the surgeon says yes. And so she says, "Yes, please do the surgery." And the surgery happens, and indeed he becomes a quadriplegic. In the next 10 years of his life, he wrote 2 books and authored dozens of articles because he knew what would make his life worth living. Towards the end of his life, it became so difficult that he was going to need a feeding tube. And he said no. He said, "I'm not interested in a feeding tube," and moved into hospice care and died at peace and in control. That, my friends, is why a power of attorney is about the question, can I live with that? So when I'm talking to a family, right, we've got mom and we've got these 2 daughters nearby, and we've got, a son who's out of town. Again, like Rabbi Stern said, we got to talk to mom. What does mom want? What's important for mom? I get adult children calling me all the time. "I need a power of attorney for my mom." And I'll say, "I don't know what you're talking about. This document belongs to your mother. It allows her to remain in control and her to choose who her decision makers will be. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about this later on, but because I'm conscious of our time limit here, but I do want to say we have a lot of resources available to make these conversations easier, because it is very easy for me to talk about, because that's my job. I talk about this all day long. Okay. But I know that within families, it can be much harder to have these conversations. And we have all sorts of tools, some of which I'll be able to put in the chat to be able to help. And also you could come see me because we offer free legal services at CJE. So there's a lot of resources available. My immediate concern for this family is if mom ended up in the ER and daughter 1 is saying, yes, 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 and daughter 2 is saying, no, 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 then we don't have a clear answer of what mom wants in that situation. And depending on how angry these 2 sisters become at one another, this whole case could end up in guardianship court. And nobody wants that. I'm going to turn it over to Barb, who certainly works with many, many families, and I'm sure I'll talk more about powers of attorney in our next scenario.
Thank you. So, you know, many times families don't know what a care manager actually does. So when they call us, they're calling us with what's going on with their situation. So most of the time, I do first start the contact with a caregiver or a family member versus an older adult. So what we try to explain to them is they have a situation that's going on. Some decisions have to be made, but how does that happen? So we get the viewpoint of the caregiver and what's going on, and then hopefully, ideally, we can meet with the older adult. Hopefully the caregiver can be there as well, but we do, during our assessment, we try to gather the facts in the situation. We have a long conversation, and we do this all with intention to make the best decision. But I told the group just right before we met, given the fact that I usually do start with a caregiver, and my coworkers and I listen to a lot of webinars on caregiving and that. So there's a report that AARP publishes every 5 years. It's about 100 pages long. And I skimmed the caregiver section of it more so than the care recipient. So I just want to give what a caregiving landscape situation in the US right now is. So this will take about 3 minutes. I am going to be reading. You may see the top of my head. 20% of 20% of middle-aged individuals are caregivers to somebody now. 54% of them plan or expect to be one in the future. 2/3 of caregivers are employed. In addition to their employment, they provide approximately on average 24 hours of care to the person. If an older adult has dementia, the caregiver spends on average 9 hours a day with the caregiving. 40% of caregivers are in high burden situations. 24% of caregivers provide care for more than one person. 58% of caregivers felt that they have no choice but to provide the care. So they're in 2 out of 3 are in a situation that they feel that they needed to do this. 26% of caregivers are caring for somebody with dementia. 24% of caregivers felt that this caregiving makes their own health worse. 60% provide hands-on care. It's not just bill paying and grocery shopping. It's showering, dressing, grooming, getting to bed, toileting. 20% of caregivers feel alone. 27% feel they can't afford the care that a loved one needs. 62% feel that they need more education. The top 3 areas are in home safety, emotional and physical stress, and finding resources. 30% of caregivers provide care for a year. 24% of caregivers provide care for more than 5 years, and 15% provide care for more than 10 years. 15% are long distance caregivers, and 20% of caregivers have taken on debt
or stop saving it for their own retirement. So when we meet with families, we're going at it from the caregiver's needs as well as the care recipient. So that's where we first start off. And I'll end for this scenario.
I just want to comment that what Barbara just shared makes me think about two different, images. One is that caregiving is a marathon, and so you have to pace yourself. And the other thing is that, if you've ever been on an airplane and you've listened to the safety instructions, and they talk about the oxygen mask, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. And so Barbara was talking about burnout and other and the negative impacts of health, and how easy it is to sort of lose sight of that while caregiving, like one's own sense of well-being. But there's great wisdom in that airline instruction of put your oxygen mask on first. So that's what I'm thinking about as Barbara shares some of those startling statistics.
Barbara, do they talk at all about how many of the people receiving care ultimately apply for Medicaid?
That report is 100 pages long. It's very detailed. Yeah, and I could send a link to that later. They do.
Wow. I think that was really outstanding. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your perspectives. I'm going to jump in, Elizabeth, with the second scenario, so we can try to get through a little bit more that may have something to do with something you're thinking about as a participant. So we're naming our next person Susan. She's taking care of her father, who is in an assisted living community, and as well as her young children at her home. She's exhausted, and she's always had this tenuous relationship with her father. She hasn't reconciled her feelings over the loss of her mother yet. Her father's slowing down and feels the need to discuss end-of-life issues, but doesn't feel comfortable broaching the topic with his daughter. Besides, her religious practice doesn't match his, and she will not understand his requests. I'm going to ask for a volunteer on this panel to start us off. Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I can start off on this one. So a lot of times when people first call us, once again, this would probably be the caregiver calling us, they feel like they have to hurry up and tell their story, and we'll listen to it a little, and then we'll be focused on the older adult. And that's not the case in more than half of the time. So I would focus on her, I'd let her tell her entire story. And maybe from what this sounds like is as a care manager, I wouldn't even meet with the father. I would give her support and guidance for her feelings, her, what she could do best to be a caregiver, and that supporting her will support her dad in the end. I know that sounds simplistic, but when we give caregivers the time and space to say what's going on with them, it sometimes can make a world of difference. And once again, I know that sounds simple, but it isn't.
There's a phrase I picked up, borrowed, but I can't remember who I borrowed it from. So the phrase is, who will be your allies as you age? So if Susan were to come to my office potentially with her dad, or even just concerned about who's going to make healthcare decisions for dad, I would say this needs a team, because we can't all have perfect families, and we can't all be caregivers. it's not feasible. And this person is managing, working, and kids and dad. And there's still only so many hours in a day. So I would encourage this person to say who's on your team. And part of that team could be people like Ifat, right, who could help with money management. And some of those people on the team could be a care manager, or could be pastoral counselor, chaplain, rabbi, other faith leader. I mentioned earlier that we have some resources that can sometimes help. Sometimes getting a neutral party involved can really help people think about these decisions. For example, legal documents as legal documents. We're not here to discuss everything that happened with mom's death. We're here to focus on these documents. So to that end, I'm grateful to be at CJE, where I can partner with counselors and chaplain, et cetera, who can work through some of those other emotional and religious questions. And then that can help really figure out what we want to put in these documents. What can Susan do to help? What guidance do we need to give this assisted living facility about things that are meaningful for dad, about what can make dad's life better and more meaningful? And then I would encourage people to look, I'm going to put a link in the chat to a document we have on our website, which is our guide to healthcare advance directives. Do I have share screen ability? I'm going to give it a try.
I'm gonna give it to you. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it should work now.
So this is just one page of some of the things we encourage people to think about when they're thinking about their advance directives. And even if you just look at these 5 questions about how important these things are to me, you might think, all right, I can do it. I can answer these 5. But now I'm going to tell you there's 5 more pages of these questions. And so sometimes doing an exercise like this without having to talk about it, right? Susan could simply give this to dad and say, Dad, this would really help me if I really understood, right? And dad doesn't have to talk about it. He can just circle some things. And then maybe Susan can read it. And then maybe the social worker can get involved in facilitating a conversation about these things. And CJE isn't the only one who has helpful documents like these. There's the conversation starter. There's the Go Wish game. We all played Go Fish when we were little, but this is Go Wish. And again, it's talking about what is most important to me. I did Go Wish with one person recently, and at the top of his category of most important to me, were both being free of pain and being mentally aware. But what if there's a conflict? What if being pain-free means I'm not going to be mentally aware, or I'm going to sleep for 20 hours a day, right? So this is simply a starting point for this family to have conversations. And sometimes people come to me first because they think, I got to get the lawyer involved. And you are welcome to come to me first, but I will also, in my first conversation with you or your family or loved ones, encourage you to deal with those emotional questions with someone better suited to handle those things. And then when it's time to create the legal documents and put it all, dot the I's and cross the T's, then we come back to me and get that all done.
Just to note about that document, there is a section on our advanced directive documentation at CJE that makes space for consulting a rabbi or a clergy person of your choosing when dealing with your end of life wishes. So in this scenario, it talks about how dad is concerned about his religious practice not matching his daughter's. So on that document, they're, utilizing that section of saying, please consult my rabbi, my minister, whoever is this person's clergy person who would best understand their wishes. Again, like Tamara said, to write it down. You don't always have to talk about it, but to have it documented, that a specific go-to clergy person who would fully understand his practice might alleviate some of that stress. This scenario reminds me of a parable in the Talmud Yerushalmi about a rabbi who is completely praised by other rabbis. His name was Rabbi Tarfon, and the other rabbis praise him for being so good to his mother, for honoring his mother so much. But I'm not so sure this is a great scenario. So the situation is that every time mom would go out and walk in her garden, Rabbi Tarfon would crawl on the floor and place his hands under her feet so her feet wouldn't touch the ground and get dirty. And she would literally walk on him until she would reach her bed. So this is a challenging story because in some ways we can say, well, he's really honoring his mom, but on the other hand, he's actually being crushed by caregiving. And he's he's literally being crushed. So that's so often what happens with caregiving, is that it's hard. It could be painful. It can knock you down. Like Barbara was sharing some stats, but also it seems that Susan is really overwhelmed. So I just want to mention another book, since we're sharing book resources. This book is specifically for caregiving of people with dementia, but it is generally about the difficulties of caregiving, and it's called The 36-Hour Day. It's by Mace and Rabins. I can put it in the chat, just about how difficult caregiving can be because you feel like you need 36 hours in the day. But this man is in assisted living. And so I know, because I work at the Weinberg Senior Community as part of my role at CJE, that part of assisted living is that the staff does some of the caregiving. So I wonder if Susan is involving herself more in her father's care than she needs to be, and if she could be encouraged to perhaps relinquish some of her involvement in trusting the staff, which would allow her some respite. Like, does she need to be involved in does she need to be there every single day? Maybe she doesn't. Can she trust the team to do some of the caregiving so she can have a break? Sort of part of the who's on her team is also her being willing to step back and allow the staff of the assisted living building to be on her team in caring for dad. So those are the things that I'm thinking of in terms of this. I will also mention just very briefly that some of the pastoral issues that pop up in this are really core to aging, such as, and I sense it between this daughter and this father, which is forgiveness and reconciliation. And as he ages and wants to think about end of life, the need perhaps for reconciliation with his daughter could be a really important pastoral issue, and it may not be something that's easy to address, but perhaps with that trusted clergy person or a mediator or a trusted person who could maybe frame a time for them, a safe time for them to be together, there may be time to address that pastoral issue.
So I'd like to bounce off a little bit of what the rabbi just said in terms of Susan getting help and simplifying her life. It would benefit her to simplify her life. And one of the things that she hopefully can do is throwing whatever bills she has or her dad has onto autopay. And for example, the facility fee can be on autopay, the dad's credit card be on autopay if it's appropriate, and the phone bill could be on autopay. Something else that Susan can also explore is the village movement. The village movement is a national movement, and it is in many of the cities in the United States. And the concept of the village movement is to help people age in place and also continue to lead purposeful lives. And they offer volunteers so that you can have somebody come into your home to do different things. And one of the volunteers they offer, types of services they offer, the volunteers do friendly visitors. And if Susan's father could have a friendly visitor come, that would might be able to take some of the burden off of Susan. And the father might also find solace in talking to somebody who might come and be a friend at the end of the day. Another thing that actually comes to mind, it's really not something you might have thought of, but I did, because this happens every single day, and something that Susan and every caregiver needs, every child or caregiver needs to be vigilant about is senior financial exploitation. Everybody should be vigilant about it, but especially Susan, because she's exhausted, and these are the types of things that can slip through the cracks. And annually, millions of people over the age of 65 fall victim to abuse. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how smart you are and how many degrees you have. Senior financial exploitation crosses all boundaries. And there were 2 studies that were commissioned. One was called the Elder Fraud Study that estimates that 1 in 5 Americans over the age of 65 have fallen victim to financial exploitation. And then there was the MetLife study that estimates that the cost to seniors is $2.9 billion. And the truth of the matter is, it's probably a lot more expensive. It's costly than that. That's just what goes reported. And that's a whole nother topic of conversation. But to Susan, I would recommend that she have a locked drawer or a safe for her dad's valuables, like credit card and cash and whatever other valuables they might have. And also to make sure that she reviews credit card statements and bank statements, just to make sure nothing fishy is going on.
I want to follow up to one comment there. I see people coming to me all the time after a financial scam. And one of the ways to get someone involved with a daily money manager or with, other professionals is to explain the risk is to all people in this category. Even if you are the smartest person, right? Oh, that's not going to happen to me. Right. And that's a nice introduction of, why don't we just have someone else help us keep an eye, right? Make these introductions in a way that involves every kind of normal activity, right? This is how we make the first introduction. And then it's easier to get more involved or do the next step. Okay, now you already know this person, you trust this person, right? She's helped us out when we were concerned of whether something was a scam, and she's been helping us keep an eye. What if we just ask her to help with one more thing, right? And it's sort of a way to ease into getting professional help in a lot of areas of your life. Someone was asking about identifying scams. We actually do programs about this somewhat often at CJE. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau does have some great guides. They also have cutesy things like placemats. And it's scary that all of these things are still happening. The romance scam, still happening. Nigerian prince, still happening, and a lot more sophisticated scams. And one of the things also that was mentioned earlier, this special credit card that might only allow specific purchases, right? That's a way of protecting yourself from, oh, sure, I'm just going to buy $500 in iTunes gift cards and scratch off the numbers and give the numbers over the phone to this person who's calling me, right? A way of preventing that from happening might be a good thing, especially for someone who's been scammed in the past. The FBI has been clear that if an individual has been scammed in the past, they're actually sort of put on a list. The scammers put them on these lists of like the gullible person, and people who have been scammed are likely to be scammed a second time. So involving somebody else, having a second set of eyes, also with Medicare billing and Medicare fraud, right? even if your doctor is quite trustworthy, there could be somebody else in the office or in the practice or somewhere involved in this billing that's doing something fishy. So involving other people in reviewing these bills, the money going out, can really be beneficial in protecting assets. And I find that older adults, when we phrase it as we're trying to protect your assets, is a better way to say, let's get some help. Getting help's always bad, but protecting assets is good. So let's protect the assets.
I'd like to throw a question in just to, make it interesting. We have been speaking a lot about from the caregiver's perspective. And I'm wondering, as Rabbanit Yal puts it, those that identify as seniors, I love that. That's awesome. Could you speak to what the conversations might look like between the family caregiver and the older adult as all of these things are being put into place, or there needs to be conversations of maybe taking something away from the older adult and bringing in something new? How from an older adult's perspective would that conversation go?
From a legal perspective, a lot of times the older adult feels like powers of attorney are taking away their rights or taking away their ability to do something. And so we often have the conversation with the older adult that powers of attorney are actually letting you retain control, because rather than ending up in guardianship court or having an ER doctor make the decision that seems best at the moment, even if it's against the wishes of the individual, by putting these documents into place and choosing decision makers, you are retaining the authority. You are deciding who's making those decisions for you. And this can be especially important if there are multiple family members who all want to make the decisions or want to be part of that. I once spoke to a couple and he said, I want to be kept alive no matter what. Put me on the machines, keep me breathing. I want to be kept alive. And his wife said, I don't want any of that. I don't want any of that. If it comes to the end, I want some morphine and call it a day. Not quite that simple, but that was her wishes for comfort care at the end. And yet they had each chosen the other as their agent and a power of attorney. And I said, that's fine. But can you do for the other what she wants? If your wishes for yourself are so different from what the other person wants, can you do that? And if the answer is no, then don't be the agent. Love your spouse, support your spouse, cousin, sister, friend, but don't be their agent, right? And let them choose an agent who can do for them what they want. And that piece, that understanding can be hard, can be really hard to say, wow, I'm not going to choose this person. But it can also be empowering.
From a care manager's perspective, with working with an older adult or a couple, what we find a lot of times is that they really haven't had a detailed conversation with family members or the person or persons that may need to be in their caregiving circle. So, you've been independent your whole life. You've raised your kids, you've taken care of a spouse, you've done this, you've done that, but we haven't talked about more things that need to be talked about. So when they realize that, and what we try to explain to them is, if we meet with you and we get a big picture, a lot of times what they were hoping or planning on, they can't afford. So once they realize what they wished for is not affordable, then we have to talk about something else. The other thing we also talk about is, if we don't talk about these things, what happens if there's a crisis? You go to the emergency room and they're not admitting you, and they say you can't go home without 24/7 care, which these days is between $200 and $450 a day. We deal with this probably weekly. So the older adult needs to realize that when people want to help them talk about this, it's, can they afford what they hope? What if a crisis happens? Who's going to be caring for you? Those are the two biggies sometimes.
From a financial perspective, people don't want to bring somebody in to help them with their finances because they feel that they will lose control. What's important for people to understand is that when a daily money manager comes in, it's a partnership, and you learn from each other and you grow together. And then at some point, if you're no longer able to do it, oftentimes it falls in the hands of the POA. But the daily money manager is not here to take over the responsibility completely. We're here to partner. Another thing I like to stress is that I don't sign the checks. I'm not a fiduciary. I don't act as a power of attorney. So I might write the check, but the client has to sign it.
I think this is a good time to bring up the sort of core issue in aging of loss, and not just loss, like, you know, your friends are passing away, maybe people move away, but there's a lot of losses, physical losses, maybe you don't see as well, you don't hear as well. You know, your perception of the world is changing. Everyone's kind of moving faster than you. There's so many things. And so I just want to offer some reframing, because one of the things that people really want to do is maintain their independence. And the idea of losing independence is like a real blow to people's like core sense of self, which again is part of what I think of as like spiritual, you know, your neshama, your spiritual well-being, if that's totally rocked. Something I've learned along the way is the phrase retire from driving. You know, it's not I'm taking the keys away from you, but you can you retire from your job. And for some people, that's a really positive thing, because then you could do your, you know, hobbies, or you could focus on other things, your family. So you can retire from driving. You also can accept assistive devices like a cane or a walker, because it will help maintain your independence longer. It may feel like a real blow to accept a walker, because that means I'm not independent. I have to rely on this thing. But if that keeps you independent and possibly even in your home longer, because the second you fall, then we're into sort of this issue that Barbara was talking about being in the hospital and not being able to go back home without 24/7 care. And that's so cost prohibitive for most people, that if we can maintain, even with small losses of, I have to rely on this thing now, but if that helps one maintain independence longer, that's a gift. And so it's these small adjustments to losses that I think is really important to pay attention to for the older individual as they move through the aging process.
I just want to follow up one thing that Rabbi Stern was just saying. A lot of people tell me, why would I talk to a chaplain? What's a chaplain going to do? Right? And a chaplain's going to do exactly what Rabbi Stern is doing now, is focusing on what are our values. And she's not talking now, you know, about herself as chaplain. So I'm going to, about the real benefits for so many individuals who are struggling with core values. What does it mean to me and my life if I need to do X? If I need to put a power of attorney into place, if I need to move from my house to a condo, right? If I need assistance getting to synagogue, right? what do all those values mean to me? And I think a lot of people don't think about what a chaplain does. I know personally I didn't. And so I just want to make mention of that. And of course, in this community, we're so lucky to have, Rabbanit Yael and Rav Ari. And sometimes it's easier to talk to someone outside your own little community. And that's where, other folks and other chaplains can certainly play a role.
Okay, it sounds like we rounded out that quite nicely, that scenario and question. Thank you, Elizabeth. Very thoughtful. And are we ready for the final account? No, I'm kidding. The third scenario, to be embraced. We're going to talk about Bob. Bob's parents live out of town and their health has been declining lately at different rates, because why would it be the same? Bob's mom has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He's torn whether he should move by his parents or move his parents by him, or find someone to take care of them in their own home while managing everything from a distance. Bob does have a life of his own, and it's difficult to make time to fly in and out of town to visit. Bob has no siblings nor children, and he knows to have the conversation with them regarding all the difficult topics, which might include the power of attorney designation, retiring from driving, living accommodations, and all that goes with that, known as etc. Bob isn't sure where to start since there is so much to do. I'm not sure even where to start myself, but I see Rabbi Stern raising her hand, wiggling her fingers as if she's raising her hand. So please start us off.
There is so much wisdom in our Jewish tradition for this situation. So in the Talmud Bavli, there's this great story of another rabbi, because all the rabbis have parents, apparently, they're sons. And this is a story about Rav Asi, and his mom continues to ask him for things because he's caring for her. She asks for a nice home. He builds her a nice home. He asks for jewelry. She asks for help. He's able to accommodate her in all of these things. I'll get you beautiful jewelry. I'll get you, really comfortable furniture. I'll get you all these things. And then she says, I'd like you to get me a husband as handsome as you. And that, he's just like, nope, that crosses a boundary. That feels icky, that you are looking at me like that. And he realizes, the text actually says that he realizes that, well, the translation from the Talmud is that she's senile, but I don't really like that word. So that she has had some cognitive changes and he can no longer care for her. So I raise this because we're dealing with someone who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or really any kind of dementia or cognitive changes in general. It's really good to know, and for Bob to think about, and maybe he needs someone like Barbara in his life to think about where is the boundary of what he's willing to do and not willing to do. There will be, I think, for every caregiver, a line that just feels like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Maybe it's, I will not toilet my parent. Like, I need to maintain my relationship as a child. I can't do that. When we get to that point, I can't do it. I need to ask for help. I need someone else to take over that caregiving because I can't do it. I need to maintain a safe and comfortable boundary and my role as child. So maybe it's something else. Maybe it's, I can't drive you every single day because I have to go to work. I mean, like there could be anything. It could be very benign or it could be very intimate in terms of physical caregiving, but everyone will have that line. So that is a story that really stands out for me with Bob's situation. The other thing, just because Elizabeth brought up, should we also be talking about the older adults, is that I just want to note that the parents have their own lives too, and they live in a community, and they have, I imagine, friends and doctors they trust and familiar settings, which I have to admit really does help with cognitive decline if you're in familiar settings. It's very difficult to move someone with cognitive impairment unless you're moving them to a supportive living situation like memory care, which even then can be very difficult. And I'd also be curious in terms of caregiving, and Bob sort of jumping into, oh, should I move here? Should I give up my life? All this, it seems very overwhelming. I think a good place to start for him would be for him to talk to his dad. What does his dad want? What kind of help does dad need or want in caring for his wife? Because I imagine, it's very common for older adults to be caring for older adults. So I don't know how much, dad wants in terms of his sons jumping in, but it would be a really healthy, good conversation for them to have. And I'd also be really curious to know if dad realizes whether or not he needs care himself. So I think all of that is going to guide this sort of larger picture. Bob saying, do I move? Do I not move? Is really starting with dad and what kind of care they're willing to accept, how much control dad wants to maintain in caring for his wife, which he may see as his duty in their, covenanted relationship. So there's a lot to unpack, but those are the things that stand out to me. I know that was a lot, but hopefully that guides us in our conversation.
I'll go next. Just what Rabbi Stern had said when I was thinking about this scenario is a lot of times when there's one main caregiver and only child and such, they typically tend to overcommit. So meeting with Bob, we would discuss with him, if probably first before talking to the parents is, what would this scenario look like? What would this scenario look like? Your parents move towards you and they can't afford the care that they need. He said, well, I'm just going to start paying $500 towards the care. And then since the parents move near him, they think he can just stop by for dinner every night. And he grocery shops, maybe they could just he could grocery shop for them as well. So we talk about that. The other thing is like what Ifat said is with the Daily Money Managers is there's an Aging Life Care Association, National Association of Care Managers. So I would say probably on a weekly basis, we're called upon. A care manager from California says, there's an older couple near me. They're thinking of moving near their children in Chicago. Could you talk to them? Or vice versa. We have somebody saying, I have an uncle in Vermont. We're thinking he might have to move to Chicago near us. And we say, let me look up to see who's near your uncle in Vermont. Maybe they could become a care manager for him and then keep you updated. So there is this Association of Life Care Managers as well.
There's an area I often talk to people about when they're thinking about should they stay or should they move. And when you think about every task you have to do in the day, for example, the toilet broke and we need to call the plumber, right? Well, there's the cost involved, right? The plumber's going to charge us a fee, right? And there's time involved because maybe I'm going to call 3 plumbers for estimates. And then the key is the mind share. How much of your mind share is being taken up by this need to call the plumber? Are you panicking? Is dad panicking? Does dad out of state have to call me every time they have to call a plumber? What about the problem with the credit card bill? So we have both dad's mind share, right, of how much time we're spending dealing with problems, things we don't really want to deal with. And there's also Bob's mind share. How much time is he spending being a care manager instead of hiring, working with a care manager. Now, of course, finances play into all of this, and they always do. And frank discussions about finances are important. And that's why getting someone else involved can be easier, because somehow talking about your money with someone who isn't family is always easier. And so thinking about mind share for both of these parties, I think can help. And this is true. We think about this all the time, right? We go to the grocery store and we see the head of cabbage, which is cheaper than the shredded cabbage. We have to think, well, how much time is it going to take me to shred the cabbage? I don't have time. I got to go here and there and everywhere else. And today I'm going to spend the extra $1 and buy the shredded cabbage, right? We go through this every time we're in the supermarket and other places, the close gas station, the far gas station, right? But so long as that's a split-second decision, right? Well, I'm just going to do this. That's fine. If these decisions are taking up so much mind share that you can't join the book club, go to the discussion group, be part of the class you wanted to take, get out to exercise, then we got to think about whether the mind share for all of these tasks is getting too big. And that's when it's time to call in the help. So I actually learned this from our care managers at CJE, is think about a task list. If you were going to hire someone, what would you want them to do, right? And thinking about that task list of what I need to do, provide love and support to my parents, and what somebody else could do, buy the Cheerios, right? Then, I think it really can help if we put things into concrete terms. I know everyone's really shocked that the lawyer's like, write it down, put it in a list, check it off. But that is how I think. And I think that concept of mind share in so many areas of our lives can really be helpful.
So from my perspective, this is really where I bring in my resources. And this is why I'm so grateful to have this panel of professionals that I can lean on. What I would want to start off by saying, though, is that for Bob, he's an only child, and this will be his first time and last time crossing this road. And he has no clue. No clue. So what I would tell Bob is to reach out to either an organization like Council for Jewish Elderly or a senior center, because often they have departments that can guide him at the beginning of his journey. But until Bob has a solid plan in place, I would recommend the following, and I've done this before. Get a geriatric care like Barb in place, because they are boots on the ground. They can take the parents to medical appointments. They can make sure the home is safe. They can have help with those driving conversations about retiring from driving, Rabbi. They can also help find assisted living. So geriatric care managers are worth every cent. I would also engage caregivers until their parents are safe and until Bob has a plan. So these might be temporary things, they might be long-term things, but and I would also like to add that he's got to get an estate plan in place, and it might be too late for his mom, because I guess once she's compromised with cognitive impairment, it's too late to put a POA in place. But that has to be done ASAP. Even from my perspective as a daily money manager, it is very hard for me to start working with somebody if they don't have a power of attorney in place, because if they start to decline and I have nobody to turn to, and I can't work with somebody once they're compromised, it's a sticky, undesirable situation.
That I just have to add is, with all three of these scenarios, it was seeming like people had time to plan. And I would say at least a third of the time, people come to us in a crisis, and it might be too late. Time gives opportunity and options. No time brings what we can all imagine. Not the best solutions.
I used to work in a hospital, and something that the chaplains were in charge of doing was a lot of what Tamara does, which is healthcare power of attorneys. Because where I was living at the time, you don't need a lawyer necessarily for that. And a lot of times people were very hesitant, but they're already in the hospital. And so I like to say it's advanced planning. Like, you're thinking in the future. Now is the time, because in the future, it may not be a good time. So that's why it's good to do these things when it's not stressful, and you can imagine and think through calmly all the different scenarios, because you're thinking about it in advance. Like, that's exactly advanced care planning. You're thinking about it in advance, meaning not in crisis. I had a question for Ifat, actually, about something you said. You said that it was too late for the mom in terms of certain things because of her cognitive impairment, but because she's married to someone who still has decisional capacity, we presume in this scenario, is that something that could be done? Could those type of arrangements be made like jointly because they're married?
So I'm going to defer to Tamara.
Oh, never mind.
Thank you. So certain things couples might have jointly, say a joint checking account, right? A joint checking account belongs to each person equally. Either person could empty the account, could write checks, could put money in, take money out. Then there are accounts that people have individually. Think a work retirement account, an IRA, right? So if she has an IRA and does not have a power of attorney in place, and she needs to make a withdrawal and does not have capacity, there is nothing in the law that gives her husband the right to take out that money. And I think that was your question. So certainly things that are jointly held, absolutely those are joint. But the reason we want these documents, even between husband and wife, is exactly for those things that are held in the name of one person only. Sometimes that could be an automobile, right? His car and her car, and for whatever reason, they didn't put both names on the title. That can be such a big headache if only one person is on title and that person no longer has decisional capacity. Just to follow up on one detail, an early diagnosis does not mean that a person can't sign documents. My legal requirement is that the person understand the document at the time they sign it. So a person who has great mornings, right? Mornings, the individual is clear, coherent, understands the documents, can have a conversation with me, and we sign it in the morning, it is valid, even if the person by evening tends to have more appearances of cognitive decline, right? Might not remember all the details, right? The key is at the time of signing. So there's a lot you can put in place at the very beginning of a major medical diagnosis. So that is one thing. And there's a question in the chat. I thought I answered it, but I'm going to answer it again to everyone. The question was whether you can simply download powers of attorney from the internet, or is a lawyer necessary? And here's where I liken lawyers to doctors, right? So sometimes, you know, a cardiologist is great, but not if you have a skin problem, right? Then you don't go to your cardiologist, right? You also don't dose your own medication, right? We let our doctors do that, our medical professionals. So it's a good idea to get a legal professional involved in legal documents. There's some explanation required. For example, there's certain boxes you can check about timing and about, for example, the power to make gifts and other statutory powers in the power of attorney. It's not just one thing. And so it's important that you understand what all those powers are and if you want to choose to add additional powers. The healthcare document, actually, part of it changed just in January 1st, 2023. There was a change to the healthcare power of attorney, which has not been changed on the form that's available online. I've actually asked legislatively when the change is going to show up on the one online, and nobody knows because it's the Illinois legislature. But your local attorneys can help you with those details. And so it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer. If you don't want to talk to a lawyer, you can get the forms from the Illinois Department of Health. I don't need to keep it a secret. It's not my secret. The forms are available at the Illinois Department of Public Health. Make sure you get them witnessed and notarized appropriately. We had someone who used a notary as a neighbor, but the notary notarized it 2 days after the witnesses had signed, and the banks rejected it because it wasn't done concurrently. So things like that are things we take care of start to finish in our office. So it's important to get them done so that the banks and the people who need them can accept them.
So talking about what Tamara said, that the bank rejected it, other places can reject it too, especially hospitals. And if you do not have appropriate powers of attorney for healthcare, it could go to the courts. And if it goes to the courts, it could go to guardianship. And if it goes to guardianship, it is very expensive. So do yourself a favor and take care of the documents when you're able to do it, and probably a lot cheaper. And as long as we're talking about preparing, some of the things I tell my friends is to make sure that they cross-train. What do I mean by that? When you're living in a house with somebody, like another adult, oftentimes you divide and conquer. Like one person does the stuff at the household and the cooking and the kids, and the other does the bill pay. Well, you got to talk to each other, and you have to know. You have to cross-train when it comes to the finances, because if the spouse, let's call it, who does the finances becomes incapacitated, if you don't talk to each other, the other spouse will be lost. So get to know where the checkbook is, know where the usernames and passwords are, know who your team is, estate planning attorney, wealth manager, you know, anybody that is relevant to you moving forward when your spouse becomes incapacitated would be helpful, and you don't want to have to find that out in a crisis. On the flip side of it, it's never too early to talk to kids about financial well-being. So credit cards, let your kids know that if they have a credit card, if they use it, it's like a loan, and they should pay it off in every statement period. Otherwise, they're going to be paying more than the items cost. Bank reconciliations, so important. You may not think so, but in this day and age, there's so many instances of people, of crooks going to the mailboxes, taking out checks and using household chemicals to clean the checks and rewrite them. If you don't balance your checkbook, then you might miss that. And also budgets. It does not hurt to start putting budgets in place for kids so that they know how much they could spend.
Thank you all, excuse me, so much. We're coming to the end, and I want to make sure that if there are any questions that went to Ravanit Yael, that we cover those. Ravanit?
So most of the questions went in or all of the questions went in the general box and have been answered ad hoc. But if people do have more questions, I would say just throw them in the chat right now. And while people are typing, I'll just take a moment to say thank you to Elizabeth and to Marla. Really, without their help, both from CJE and from JCFS, and from them themselves representing their agencies, this would not have happened. And it certainly would not have been as smooth and professional and engaging as it was. So really a huge thanks to both Marla and Elizabeth, and to Barb, Ifat, Tamara, and Rabbi Stern. It really felt like a gift of an evening to me. I'm sure it felt like that to many of the other participants here. And to say that this is, again, not the end, it's just the beginning. If anything that happened tonight interested people and you want to do a follow-up deep dive into the legal piece or a tech study or a money managing session, please let me know and we'll arrange to do more things that fit our needs as we as we go on this journey, and to say that one thing I felt strongly through this panel is, you know, we talked about how lonely it can be to age, but we are not alone. We are blessed to be in community and to be in community with such amazing panelists and experts as well. So really an immense thank you to the panel and to its organizers. And if anyone has any questions, either throw them in the panel, or I think we're a nice intimate group. You can just jump off mute and ask your question. Take advantage of our fleeting moments with the experts. If I may ask a question while people are maybe thinking, is everything we talked about was like fairly amicable, and I wonder if you might talk about like the experience of a child who comes in knowing what is right for the parents, and the parent is adamant to do the wrong thing, you know, or what we perceive to be the wrong thing, something that feels either dangerous or, you know, not healthy or safe, you know, how to navigate that feeling. And then also I'll just add that Janina wrote in, if you like could recommend one thing, how would we start planning? What would that thing be? So the deep and heavy and also the practical.
So CJE has moved to a model of clinical intake. That means if you call CJE, what's going to happen? Your first phone call to CJE is only going to take 2 minutes, because you're going to speak to one of our concierge staff who's going to book you in for an appointment at a specific date and time. None of that waiting all day for the phone to ring, right? And that clinical intake is going to be about 30 minutes with a social worker who's going to help understand what is going on. What's the big picture? Some of that might be for you. Some of that might be for your loved one, your neighbor or your friend. Okay, so the CJE intake social worker can then help prioritize and will then work with the rest of the CJE staff to have us involved. So this person calls and needs, you know, help with Medicare, but also the medications are getting confused and the bills aren't getting paid and they don't have powers of attorney, right? So the social worker at CJE is going to involve all the departments necessary, and the departments are going to talk to each other about who's going to take the lead first, second, and third, right? Depending on, you know, the importance and the urgency of certain areas. So as far as where you should start, if you're thinking about that you might need CJE services in one of our 9, 10, 11 departments, right, then call and talk to one of our clinical social workers, because they'll be able to guide you through that. The CJE website has a ton of information on it. So feel free to play around on that website, including a budgeting form that is in 16-point font, which just the reason I mention that is because we all want to be able to read the documents that are put in front of us, and we all can feel more empowered to fill out documents and be part of this process if we can read them. And so we want to make sure that what we're doing is accessible to others. And your other question is, what happens when our loved ones make bad decisions? And they're allowed to do that. And that's the bottom line, is that our parents and siblings and loved ones are entitled to make bad decisions. And that's hard to watch. And it's different between making a decision that is a poor choice and making a decision that is unsafe. And that's sometimes a hard distinction. And that's where we sometimes get a care manager or a social worker involved. I'll let some of the others chime in on that.
Along the same lines, American Association of Daily Money Managers is a great place to start. It is a wealth of information. If you are looking to learn more about what a daily money manager does, they have resources about that. If you're looking to hire a daily money manager, they have interviewing questions. So it has so much information on it, just to become oriented on what a daily money manager, how they can help.
Aoife, can you also clarify the Village organization that you were speaking about before?
Yeah, so there is actually North Shore Village Network in Evanston. And the villages that are in the United States, they differ. They're not all the same, but in Evanston, I can give you more information about that because I'm pretty involved in it. And their model is a 2-tier model. And what they have is a social membership and a full membership. And the social membership allows people to participate in all of their activities, much of which would be free to the social member. But if they go out to like a show, then you would pay for your ticket. But if they have so much they have so many special interest groups, they have a lot of Zoom programming, free. The next tier is a full membership, which allows people to access volunteer services. So if they want rides to doctor's appointments, they have access to rides to doctor's appointment. And I think it's like 3 a week or something along those lines. They can have somebody do their shopping for them. They can have computer help. They can have friendly visitors. So it helps people stay in their home and continue to lead purposeful lives in that way.
I want to respect everyone's time here. So if someone has an urgent last word, we would welcome it. But I also want to make sure that everyone knows about the amazing workshop that Elizabeth is doing on Tuesday, February 14th. And maybe I'll let her say a word if she'd like, but it's called The Gift of Wisdom, and it's an active participant workshop. So if you enjoyed tonight, we hope you'll join us for a midday over your lunch, totally appropriate to eat on Zoom, workshop called The Gift of Aging.
So a quick description. So I will be working, it's very participatory. We'll be talking about patterns in your life that you've actually never thought about, which we will think about right then and there. We'll talk about how you feel about humor, how you feel about relationships, how you feel about family, lots of different fun things that we're going to discuss. Situations that have happened over your lifetime. We're going to be doing a lot of laughing, and it's going to be a great time. So I hope that you can join.
Amazing. If you'd like anyone's direct contact info and you can't find it, you can always reach out to me or to Elizabeth, and we can certainly help you out. And I believe that Marla is sending us a gift of information that we will be putting out at Kiddush the next time I'm in town, which is not this Shabbat, but the following Shabbat. So plenty of resources in hand to follow up, and we can provide contact info for anyone who needs. And have a wonderful evening. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you to the panelists again for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Amazing, guys. Thank you. I'm going to end the meeting.